this panel, and that would be Michael Robertson, who is the Deputy Director of Art Equity and facilitator and educator and co-founder of the Accomplices Leadership Institute, Amy Smith. I want to welcome both of you, and I hope you will unmute at this point so we'll be able to hear you. And so I want to start with you all, both being, as I mentioned earlier, accomplices. How, first of all, how do you yourselves come to this work of helping to dismantle systemic racism in theater? And from the vantage point that you both share as white artists, white facilitators, what has systemic racism in theater look like for the two of you? And we can start with Amy.
Thank you, Katia. Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And I really have learned so much from the history lessons of tonight. So I'm really grateful for that. Well, what brought me into this work, especially around my work in anti-racism circles and dismantling systemic racism in the circles that I'm in, is just coming from my experience as a white person in the dance and theater world, seeing the systemic racism with my own eyes and perpetuating it, frankly, in ways that I didn't fully understand until I went on my own journey of self-education around how I have unknowingly benefited from systemic racism in the dance and theater communities. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be raised in a household. My family's from DC. My mom was at the March on Washington, and a lot of my family was active in the civil rights movement. So I was raised with a lot of race consciousness, but still not enough to truly understand and unpack how the playing field is unlevel, which Robert Hooks, you mentioned that's one of the most important things we need to do right now is level the playing field. And I couldn't agree more. We have a serious problem of systemic racism in this country, and it is changing. There is a reckoning happening right now, but we need deep, profound systems change to make it happen. And I'll let Michael answer the question from his perspective.
Amy, thank you, Katia. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you all so much. Woodie King, to be in space with you again. It's been so long since a couple of TCG moments. Robert Hooks, what a gift to be in space with you. Thank you. I would say that I come to this work, it's a moral imperative for me. And I think so much of what I saw when I worked at the LARC Play Development Center for 11 years, and we championed writers, living writers and their work. And we only worked in the development phase, but we would talk to and advocate with producers around the country, regional theaters, to get plays by Katori Hall, Dominique Morisseau, Rajiv Joseph produced. People would not produce those plays 15, 16, 17 years ago. They would not do it. And I totally became disillusioned with the American theater because of the inherent racism. The idea that a writer of color, that a Black writer was a risk, was highly problematic for me. And so for me, it became a moral imperative to be like, wait, what am I doing as a white person to perpetuate this? What are the systems and structures that are benefiting me, that are not benefiting my colleagues of color, my Black playwright friends who are not getting their plays produced? Why are my white playwright friends getting produced, but not my Black and other people of color, much less my indigenous friends not getting produced? So for me, it became a moral imperative as I did my own political racial education that did not come from the public school system. I owe my racial political education, I would say 80% of what I know is from colleagues of color, and specifically Black women. And I want to honor them and just say that I know so much because of my deep, close relationships with them. So that's how I come to this work. I think we're at a reckoning. I agree with Amy. The We See You White American Theater demands that were posted several months ago are a gift. They're a love letter to the American theater, people of color, and that movement is led by Black people and lots of other folks of color. That is those are the demands. That is the pathway to the future. Otherwise, predominantly white theaters will be irrelevant. If they want to actually remain relevant and be close to community and be community building organizations, they're going to need to follow those demands and implement those demands. So yeah, so Katia, I hope that answers the question a little bit why I come to it. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, it does. If you could, though, for our viewers and our listeners who may not know what those demands are, could you very briefly outline them for us?
Sure. So a group of Black, Indigenous people of color put together a list of demands. I keep them right next to me all the time. There are about 150 demands, basically saying, we see you, white theaters. We see that you have not paid us as much. You've not hired us as much, that you've not created working conditions that allow us to bring our full humanity. And by we, I mean Black, Indigenous people of color. So these are demands at all levels of the field, academia, boards, theater managers, casting directors, everything. I mean, this has brought it home. This is such a gift to the American theater. When we write the next theater book 50 years from now, this is a pivotal moment, because on the other side of this moment, white theaters who have not listened and responded to this moment will be irrelevant. We will not need them because they're not responding to what the community needs. So basically, it's a list of demands, and it's followed by letters from the organizers. It's an anonymous group of people who are writing letters to predominantly white theaters to say, hey, we're watching you. We want to know what you're doing. Please respond to the demands. Keep us posted on that. They're also doing Facebook postings where they show you a visual of the board of directors and the staff of predominantly white theaters so that you can have a visual representation. Who's in charge? Who's making the decisions? And you know what? They look a lot like me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. So I want to ask you both before we move on and get more from Mr. King and Mr. Hooks. How do you approach your white colleagues? And really, frankly, this is even beyond theater, right? Because this is a reckoning on a grand scale across all yes, all segments of society. But how are you, we talk a lot about white fragility and these other things. How are you having these very difficult conversations with, and Amy and I spoke about this in the interview that we did a few weeks ago, but how are you both approaching these very difficult conversations with your white colleagues, particularly those, or very specifically those that, that don't see the problem, that really have a blind spot? You know, and while we talk about how you're having conversations with your white theater colleagues, I think that we could extend that out to, frankly, how can all of us, or all white people who are allies, have these difficult conversations so that we as Black people are joined and meant in the work of dismantling systemic racism, whether it is within theater, which we're talking about today, or in in broader society.
Yeah, it's challenging because a lot of my white colleagues still don't understand the depth of the problem, and because as white people we benefit from systemic racism, there's so much resistance and reluctance to giving up power, the decision-making power that Michael was referring to. But that is what's needed. Systems change is what's needed. Reparations are what's needed from government and philanthropy. And also we need meantime harm reduction. So to that end, there's a lot of, we need more than book groups. Book groups are important, you know, white people getting together and reading White Fragility and Ibram Kendi's book and other books that help white people understand how systemic racism operates and benefits us every day. We need to be educating ourselves and not relying on our colleagues of color to educate us in the workplace and in our theater and dance environments. We need to be spending time together, educating ourselves about how to operationalize dismantling racism in our workplaces. And that work needs to be in solidarity with and led by our Black colleagues and colleagues of color and Indigenous colleagues, and be accountable to our communities. So around the time of George Floyd's murder, there were a lot of white theaters that put out, and white dance companies that put out fake solidarity statements saying we believe Black Lives Matter, but with no real action behind them. And what we need are action plans, and so that our theaters of predominantly white theaters and white dance companies can be held accountable. And the work that I'm doing with the Accomplices Leadership Institute, which is a program for white leaders in theater, or well, white arts leaders in any arts field, is held accountable by the Arts Administrators of Color Network, which created it. So there's that kind of built-in structure where we're gathering as white people to understand more about and operationalize dismantling racism, but we're being held accountable by an organization that is Black-led and led by people of color. So that's just a really important piece of it. And because Denise Saunders-Thompson is from IABD is here on the call, I also just want to mention
Yes.
that there was We See You White American Theater, and there was also Can You Hear Me Now put out by IABD, which is a similar call to action for white dance companies. So I just want to lift that up also. Thank
you, Amy. And Michael?
Yeah, Katia, I really appreciate your question. How do I talk to my white colleagues? And it's not just theater. Like, I feel like theater is one of the many solutions. It's changing hearts and minds. It's the bigger conversation. It's hard and it ranges. So for me, it depends. Is the person at least in the room with me and going to stay in the room? All the way to hostile, right? Not violent. I don't deal with the violent white folks. I don't deal with neo-Nazi groups, but I'll go all the way to hostile. It depends. Where are we? Who else is in the space? Are they a numbers person? Do I need to cite the statistics of we can basically predict how long Black people will live based on what science is telling us? Demographers are telling us, psychologists and sociologists. There's lots of research about how race has a significant impact on our lives. It's a construct, but it has exceeding social impact. So sometimes if they're a numbers person, I need to quote numbers. If they're an emotional person, I try to tell my own story about my own evolution into being an aspiring anti-racist. And I am aspiring, I'm not an expert. I know what I know and I'm on a journey. So it really ranges for me, Kia. Depends on who that person is. What are they coming to the table with? I would say some of the most pernicious behavior is around progressive, liberal, Northern New England people. I'm originally from the South, the Deep South, and I feel like in some ways it's like people are in my face about it there, but they're not in New England. So it depends on sort of the cultural norms and do I have standing with that particular person? So it ranges for me from storytelling to asking questions in a curious way to statistics. So that's how I approach a range of white folks depending on the moment. And I'm not always successful.
Well, and I appreciate the honesty you both have brought to that it's a hard conversation and that you're not always successful. I want to, if I may, I want to bring Mr. Hooks into the conversation because, you know, part of, I think, the work that Black artists do, and particularly theater, where there's so much storytelling, right? And we know we have storytelling in other mediums. But Mr. Hooks, one of the things that I learned about you very early on was your work with the Lorton Reformatory Group, the Inner Voices, and you directing them, and how important it was to bring the experience of mass incarceration to a broader audience that could then humanize that experience and that understanding, you know. And honestly, I feel like in the carceral state we live in now, that kind of work is more needed than ever, because really we have gotten to a place where it's really out of sight, out of mind. If you're locked up, you're not thought about at all. And that's our men, our women, our children. And so, Mr. Hooks, could you just talk about, even as we dismantle racism in the theater space, how do we continue to bring forth those really difficult stories, for instance, like the one that was brought forth in Hollow Days by the Lorton Reformatory Group?
Right. Well, thanks, Kate. And I also just want to say to Amy and to Mike, thank you for your commitment, your passion, and for being there and doing what you do. Let me just deal with the question of holidays. that the Lawton Reformatory, when I moved back home to build a company, I befriended a couple people that talked about Lawton Reformatory and the people incarcerated over there. And the name Rosia Brown, Roach Brown,
Yes, yes.
came up. And Roach and I went over to Lawton. Roach was writing, had a group of actors, and was wanting to put on a Christmas play. And I was thrilled that they wanted me to come over and work with them. And that's when Roach and I became very, very good friends. We put on an amazing Christmas show, Holidays. And I went over several times after that to work with this group of people that Roach had. You know, the stories that these young Black men, incarcerated Black men, had to tell about their own personal lives, and the fact that what they found working with Roach in drama class just made them better people. And they just swore that when they got out, they would do all kinds of wonderful things. And they did, because Roach and I, over the years, have been very, very tight in talking about the things that we did back then. So I was really pleased. And Kate, I can't remember the question that you about. I mean, I wanted to. First of all, let me just, you know, we don't. That's the Lawton thing is the Lawton. It was wonderful. It was a great experience and all. But the BIPOC concept, which I think is amazing, and my wife and I talked about it when we first learned about the letters that were being written about you know, discrimination in theater in America. And I was reminded very much, I mean, we talked about the letters, and we read some of the letters. And the way the Negro Ensemble Company started, the way I got into producing plays, was that, well, the Negro Ensemble Company, with that Douglas Turner Ward and I, when we traveled the state with Raisin in the Sun, we realized in the communities, the lack of theater, the lack of cultural institutions, whatever. And Douglas Turner Ward, when he wrote those two plays, Happy Ending and Day of Absence, Day of Absence was about that, about town. We won't get into that because I know we're running short of time. But Woody can speak to this as well. I would love to. We wrote a letter. I mean, Douglas Turner Ward wrote this great letter for the New York Times. It was printed in the New York Times in 1966. And that was the real reason that we were funded through the Ford Foundation, when Doug wrote this article called Theater in America for Whites Only. And if you can look it up, it's an amazing letter. And this was in 1966, right? And that was the beginning of us being able to raise the money and the attention for creating a Black theater in America. And so I was happy when this BIPOC thing came. And I'm looking for leadership. I'm looking for somebody to tell me, I love the fact that there will be inclusion in white theater across the country. There needs to be. There needs to be more Black stories told in theater companies in New York and across the country. And I don't know if we'll ever see that happen on any large scale. My whole thing is that we do it ourselves. We put companies together ourselves and we produce plays, Black stories. There are tons of Black stories with all kinds of amazing characters. Can't rely on white producers to do it for us. It would be great. It would be wonderful if there was more of inclusion. I think I might have gone out.
It was just a blip. It was just for a moment.
Yeah, because they have those. But anyway, I don't want to talk too much because I want Woody to, because Woody's been there in New York and I haven't. I've been out here. But I'm happy to see the BIPOC thing. And I'm happy, it's Kate, right?
Katia.
Yes, Katia, right. Oh,
Yes.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing what you do. And so you know, I'm happy to see it. It would be great to see a theater in America, white theater in America, all inclusive. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm all about Black theater. I'm all about us doing our thing. I'll go to White Theater. I go to it all the time. I've done 8 Broadway plays. So I'm into White Theater. But I think we should concentrate our energies on building our own cultural institutions. And I think we're doing that as well.
So a moment of, if it's to be, again, quoting, I think this is Calvin Rolark, Dr. Calvin Rolark, if it's
Yes.
to be, it's up to me, basically is what we're talking about. And thank you, Mr. Hooks. That was a perfect segue into Woodie King, because Mr. King, I have been familiar with your work for a very long time. And as Mr. Hooks was saying, it really is, and let's be clear, we did have a moment in the history, the art history of Black people, performing art history of Black people, where Black artists were coming together, just like the Negro Theater Ensemble, just like the Black Rep. In music, there were movements like the Black Artist Group. There was the AACM in Chicago. There were these pockets of folks who were self-determined to create something and not wait for the white power structure to do it for them. And Mr. King, your work in New York with the New Federal Theater was certainly that. I remember hearing from Craig Harris and Sekou Sundiata and other artists who would come to you with ideas and you would help them mount it. So if I could ask you to speak on where you think we are in this moment in terms of the work that needs to be done to both dismantle systemic racism, but also to build a structure that allows us to build movements and institutions for ourselves.
Well, you got to do it yourself. You know, whether I'm working with the American Place or working with Joseph Papp in the Public Theater, or whether I'm doing Chelsea Theater Center or Mosepti in Philadelphia or a theater. What I do, I find the plays and I put them on and I get the critics to come down. And if it wins an award, everybody else comes to see it. Everybody comes to see it, including members of the board of Joseph Papp's Theater, and they want us to bring it there. But then I want the money that I put into it back, and 25% of it in the new place. So that goes into the building of the organization. And it was the Negro Ensemble Company. And,
thank you.
Okay, so, and Craig Harris and Sekou Sundiata. Craig Harris is a musician. Mm-hmm. I never dealt with developing the work of Craig Harris or the poetry of Sekou Sundiata. We were just close because they were close with the Ntozake Shange. That play was in a bar on East 3rd Street, and I went over to see it. And I said, I will put up, I think back then it was costing $25,000, $30,000 to do for a month. And then I invited all the people down to see it. It won all kinds of awards. And then I talked to Joseph Papp, and they moved to the public, and they moved on. But I took it to Australia. I took it to London, and the profits came back to the New Federal Theater. Understand? So those people who won Tony Awards, you've got to control your work. You got to control what you do. What you pay the artists is, will Trezana Beverly work at New Federal Theater for $250 a week, or will she insist on going to the arena stage for $575? Will an artist, Sade Lithcott, will he work at the New Federal Theater for $250 a week, or will he go somewhere else and try and find work? And now, because the system is so, I don't want to say racist, the unions themselves set the pay scale if you're in a 90-seat theater and if you're in a 250-seat theater. And so if you don't know those rules, then how can you work in a system where you don't know the rules? You're always going to say, oh, those white people got it made, man. They're making so much money. Okay, if he fills a big theater, that's different than filling an 89-seat theater.
Mhm.
You know, it's totally different. Ed Bullins, he might have won the Drama Critics Circle Award at New Federal, and Tazaki might have moved her play to the New Federal, but she made a bigger royalty
Right.
at the public theater. Slave Ship made a bigger royalty in Paris and Switzerland. And that was from this free Southern theater. But I got all the money I put into it back. And then I made money from those companies. So you gotta own what you do. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
Yes.
the systemic part of racism is now in a recent grant, which you will read about if you haven't heard about, they have given $5 million to something called Black Seed.
Yes.
Okay, and what you will hear about is Penumbra, where the Ford Foundation gave $2 million to Penumbra. What you will read about is they gave $2 million to the Apollo. Now, why is all this important? It's important because Black people are in charge of these grants within the foundation. When Robert Hooks and I was working, Vantar Whitfield was at the National Endowment for the Arts. He ran something called the Expansion Arts Program. When that changed, our funding changed. You understand? As the funding changes within the structure of the funding, you got to either not produce or continue producing and figure out another way.
Right.
Like now, I know for the retrospective series, I'm playing actors just to read a play for one day and 3 days a week. I'm, paying $200 or $300. That I know no one else is paying that. I know they can't go anywhere else and get that. But would they? And they all Black plays. I'm not interested in doing